Few things are as dangerous as a myth told too many times. Rome, the eternal city, cradle of Western civilization, monumental architecture, and the rule of law, and, according to many, of democracy. But is that really true? You may have heard this phrase before. The Romans, like the Greeks, created a system where the people had a voice. A republic in which citizens voted, made laws, and enjoyed freedom. A society of equality, merit, and public participation. It all sounds very noble and modern. But here's the issue. What if all of that is only a half-truth? What if the much-celebrated Roman democracy was nothing more than a carefully staged performance meant to keep power in the hands of a privileged few? In this video, we're going to journey to the heart of Republican Rome and peek behind the Golden Curtain. Who truly held power? Who was really allowed to vote? And more importantly, what happened to those who dared to challenge the system? You're about to discover that the Roman government was neither as republican nor as democratic as many people imagine. But to understand how this power game worked, we need to go back to the beginning and closely examine the backstage of one of the most influential political structures in history. The story of the Roman Republic begins, like almost everything in Rome, with an act of rebellion. In 509 BCE, the Romans rose up against their last king, Tarquin the Proud, a name that already carried too much arrogance to remain in power. So what did the people want? Freedom. But the truth is, what they got was something quite different. The end of monarchy did not mean the beginning of democracy. Power simply changed form. It moved from the hands of a king to the hands of an elite. The patricians, members of the oldest and most influential Roman families, took control of the new government. And the plebeians were once again pushed to the sidelines, watching, waiting, and eventually fighting. Decades of social tension and popular protests led to the plebeians' first major victory, the laws of the 12 Tables in 450 BCE. This milestone may seem progressive at first glance. After all, it was the first time citizens' rights and duties were formally written down. But in practice, it was a harsh reminder of who still made the rules. The aristocrats, now without a crown, continued to hold the reins of justice. The people, though heard, were only heard within clearly defined limits. In the 2nd century BCE, the Greek historian Polybius, who lived in Rome as a prisoner and became a privileged observer of Roman politics, described the system as brilliant. To him, Rome had created what philosophers called a mixed government, an almost perfect balance among three powers: the consulship, with 2 elected leaders acting as military commanders and supreme magistrates; the Senate, dominated by the nobility, which controlled finance, diplomacy, and foreign policy; and the popular assemblies, where citizens could vote on laws and elect magistrates. Or at least some of them could. 2 consuls at the top, so that no single man ruled alone, and short terms, just 1 year, to prevent tyranny. A Senate that did not create laws, only gave advice, and a division of power that was checked, balanced, and secure. It sounds fair and balanced, but the question that starts to bother us is, who actually benefited from this balance? The truth is, the pair of consuls held almost unlimited powers during their terms. They commanded the legions, controlled the public treasury, convened the Senate and the assemblies, enforced laws, and decided the fate of entire cities. And while the 1-year term seemed like a safeguard against abuse, human ambition has never been so easy to contain with just a written rule. Just remember one name: Gaius Marius, the general who, faced with external threats, convinced the people that he was indispensable. And the result? 7 terms as consul, something unthinkable in the Republican ideal. Marius shaped the office to suit himself, altered centuries-old traditions, and opened the door to a new type of politician, the populist with his own army. And behind all of this, watching, guiding, and influencing, stood the Roman Senate, officially a consultative body, but in practice, the true brain of the Republic. Composed almost entirely of patricians and former magistrates, the Senate held in its hands the invisible reins of politics. It decided who was an ally or an enemy, approved or sabotaged reforms, manipulated elections and courts, and did all of this with authority that came not from laws, but from tradition, prestige, and fear. The Senate didn't need to give direct orders. A suggestion was enough, and the rest happened like magic. There, the real fates of the Republic were determined, completely out of sight of the plebeians and the assemblies. So, if the Senate was the brain of the Republic, we could say the aristocrats were its muscles and its wallet. Because in Rome, power was expensive. Running for public office wasn't just a matter of merit or reputation. It was an undeclared war of luxury, influence, and money. To get elected, it wasn't enough to be good, you had to be spectacularly rich. Candidates built their networks of influence through political clientelism, a quiet web that covered the entire city. Here's how it worked. You were poor and needed a job or protection. All you had to do was find an influential patrician, and he would help you. In return, you owed him loyalty, voting the way he told you to, and showing public support by standing at his side. It was a silent exchange, but extremely powerful and effective. And that's how elections were won. Some laws prohibited senators from engaging in commerce, but they easily sidestepped these rules, using frontmen, relatives, and secret agreements. The Republic forbade it, but looked the other way, because in truth, almost everyone was involved. What was sold as a republic of honorable men was, in practice, a system where wealth bought everything: offices, influence, and even justice. It's strange to say, but doesn't all of this still sound incredibly familiar? Now, about the assemblies, there were three main types: the centuriate, the tribal, and the plebeian. In theory, they were spaces for political participation, where citizens could vote on laws, choose magistrates, and even judge legal cases. But the first trap lay in who conducted these assemblies: only the magistrates. They chose the day, the location, the agenda, and many times even the outcome. If a vote displeased the elite, it could be annulled under the pretense of a bad omen, a technical error, or divine signs. All of it legally. In the most powerful of these assemblies, the centuriate assembly, which elected consuls and decided military matters, votes were not distributed equally. They were grouped into 193 blocks or centuries, and 98 of those belonged to the elite. In other words, most of the time, the decision was already made before the poor even had a chance to vote. Now add to that the fact that voting was public, no secrecy, no protection. If you voted against the interests of a powerful patron, you could lose their protection, your job, or even your family's safety. So, the assembly, which appeared to be a symbol of Roman democracy, functioned as a precise gear in the aristocracy's machine, controlled from the top down. But maybe, in the midst of this unequal system, there was a faint glimmer of justice: the tribal assembly. Unlike the centuriate assembly, it didn't divide citizens by wealth, but by geographic location, into 35 tribes or districts. On paper, it was a more balanced system. Each tribe had one vote. A rural citizen, in theory, had the same weight as an urban one. In theory, yes, but in practice, a very different story. To vote, citizens had to be physically present in Rome. Farmers from the countryside, soldiers on leave, and small-scale producers living far away could hardly leave their work, travel for days to the capital, and then wait hours in line to cast a vote. Meanwhile, aristocrats, with their homes in Rome and properties everywhere, voted with ease. Over time, the urban tribes became manipulated and bloated, packed with massive numbers of poor citizens, while the rural tribes, often controlled by large landowners, retained the same voting weight. It was ancient gerrymandering, the art of manipulating districts to preserve power. As a result, the rich didn't just control resources, offices, and the Senate, they also controlled the maps and the territories. The geographic divisions, which were supposed to democratize politics, became just another cog in the machinery of exclusion. Rome continued to present itself to the world as a republic of equal citizens, but behind this facade, the votes of the poor counted for less. And sometimes they didn't even make it to the ballot box. Still, for centuries, the plebeians fought for space within the political machinery of Rome, and they managed to secure a symbolic victory: the plebeian council, an assembly exclusive to common citizens, where laws could be voted on without the Senate's direct approval. More importantly, it led to the creation of the office of the tribune of the plebs, magistrates with the power of veto and the duty to protect the interests of the poor. It was the hope of a true voice amid the aristocratic noise. But, as always in Rome, power seduces and corrupts. Over time, the tribunes stopped being defenders of the people and became pawns, or even accomplices of the ruling elite. Most of the time, they used their positions to climb the social ladder, trade favors, and pursue personal political battles. The veto, which was meant to prevent injustice, became a bargaining chip. Once again, the people were nothing more than extras in their own drama. That silent betrayal corroded the foundation of the Republic. If not even popular offices defended the people anymore, who did? That's when the mask of the Republic began to fall. Roman politics literally turned into a battlefield. Private militias stormed assemblies. Rival candidates hired armed gangs. Public murders, fires, fraud, threats, and the Senate became an empty stage. At that point, generals became the true masters of Rome. Names that echo to this day: Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. Men who commanded legions and had the love of their soldiers and of the people. The Republic, weak and divided, could no longer contain them. And so, the system that once promised liberty, justice, and balance descended into chaos. Institutional instability paved the way for the most feared figure in Roman politics, the dictator. But as you may already guess, in Rome, nothing was more permanent than the power given to a strong man in times of fear. The figure of the dictator was originally conceived as a necessary evil, someone granted absolute power to restore order. But in a republic already weakened, demoralized, and consumed by violence, that figure stopped being an exception. And when Julius Caesar entered the scene, what was meant to be temporary became permanent. Caesar didn't come to power out of ambition alone. He was the direct product of a rotten system. In the eyes of the Roman people, he was the only one capable of containing the chaos and ending the political deadlock that was slowly eating Rome from within. And so, he was acclaimed by the people and elevated to dictator for life, a title that in itself shattered any remaining trace of the Republic. Rome, which for centuries had proudly rejected kings, now witnessed the birth of something even more powerful: the emperor. And what followed, as we know, was the beginning of a new and mighty era, the Roman Empire. And that's why, even with all its contradictions, Rome still forces us to ask, what is democracy, really? Is it simply the right to vote? Is it freedom of speech? Is it equality before the law? Or is it something more fragile? Something that must be defended every single day against concentrated power, dominant wealth, and institutions slowly being hollowed out? The answer, perhaps, is closer than we think. And what about you? What's your opinion? Drop it in the comments. If you like this content, consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel so YouTube can recommend more videos like this. If this surprised you, just wait until you see what Rome did to its own cities. It'll give you chills. Click here on the screen and check it out.